A very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us this evening. My name is Zoe and I'm chair of a charity called Folio Sutton Coldfield, and what we do is we support the libraries here in Sutton Coldfield by putting on events and encouraging people to fall back in love with their libraries. And as part of that whole sort of mission, we've currently got a Shakespeare festival on. So yesterday in Sutton Coldfield Library, I think many of you will be aware, we hosted everything to everybody and brought a first folio out to the library. And we had music and dance and theatrical performances. And over the last week and the coming week, we're putting on over 20 different events in I keep forgetting how many different venues, 8 or 9 different venues, including online. For example, this talk this evening is obviously one of those. I would now like to really warmly welcome tonight's speaker, May McGrail. May grew up in Sutton and she is the lead speech and drama practitioner at CENTRESTAGE Drama School. But as well as being a practitioner, she's a researcher. So she completed her master's in Shakespeare and creativity run at the Shakespeare Institute under the auspices of the University of Birmingham. And she's now a PhD student there too. And I think tonight's talk is going to be talking a little bit about some of the research she's doing as her PhD. So without further ado, I'm sure you all join me in very warmly welcoming May this evening. So over to you, Ella. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and hello to everybody. Thank you so much for joining my talk today. As Zoe has given me such a lovely introduction, thank you so much, Zoe. So just to recap, my name is May McGrail. I am a first-year PhD student at the Shakespeare Institute, which is in Stratford-Upon-Avon, run as part of UOB. I was born in Sutton Coldfield and still live here today, so I'm absolutely delighted to be part of the Sutton Coldfield Folio Shakespeare Festival. I've been lucky enough to help out with some of the fantastic events already, such as yesterday's viewings of the first folio, which was so exciting, and the performances at Sutton Arts Theatre as well. And I was delighted when Zoe asked me to give a talk on my research, so thank you so much. My research is titled The Changing Faces of Shakespeare's Cleopatra and studies how over the course of the performance history of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, attitudes towards Cleopatra, potentially more than any other Shakespearean character, have seen a huge change. At one time, within wider criticism, Cleopatra was the focus of misogynistic attacks, referred to as a whore, the worst woman in history, as a brainless or at least a shameless manipulator, and as a femme fatale with a nasty turn of mind. Yet, in more recent years, the role has been regarded as iconic and empowering, becoming a part that dame actresses write of as being the high point of their career, as shown on this slide. This shift is the foundation of my research. To understand the transformation in attitudes towards Shakespeare's Cleopatra, I created a timeline, and then I inserted the critical literary responses to the role, the changing depictions on stage, and anything outside of the world of Shakespeare's play that may have had some impact upon the changing depictions and attitudes. When studying the timeline, I found that there appears to be a number of pivotal shifts, each which have contributed significantly to the changing depictions of Shakespeare's Cleopatra on stage. Today, I will talk about 3 of those shifts, which I have titled The 19th Century Revival, The Evolving Feminist, and Cleopatra and the Modern Celebrity. In each of these shifts, Shakespeare's Cleopatra has been reimagined in line with changing contemporary ideals of beauty, sexuality, and women in politics. My thesis aims to explore each shift individually in detail, whilst asking what is driving the shift. Was it literary criticism, theatrical responses, or other factors that lie outside the world of the play? For the purpose of today's talk, I have chosen 1 or 2 key productions per shift to give a brief overview of the changing depictions of Shakespeare's Cleopatra in British stage history. A huge proportion of my research rests on productions that I have not seen, either due to them taking place before I was born or because they took place prior to my research. Therefore, my research is dependent on photographs, drawings, reviews, blogs, accounts, interviews, diary entries, and most importantly, prompt books. A prompt book is an annotated copy of the script, specifically created for the individual performance. Prompt books often include stage directions, lighting decisions, costume decisions, and details of how the script had been cut or edited for the specific production. For me, prompt books are vital as from the manipulation of the script, I can then work out how the performance decisions may have worked to create or impact that particular depiction of Shakespeare's Cleopatra. I will talk about one of the prompt books I've been able to view when discussing my first shift, the 19th century revival. However, before I am able to tell you about this first shift in the performance history of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, I need to fill in the background of the performance history of Shakespeare's play in the early modern period. Antony and Cleopatra was entered on the Stationers' Register on 20th of May 1608, which you can see pictured here. And what I've done for you as well is I've kind of zoomed in so you can see it closer and then closer again, where it says Antony and Cleopatra. The Stationers' Register was a record book maintained by the Stationers' Company of London, and it allowed publishers to document their right to produce a particular printed work. It constituted as an early form of copyright law. Although an entry was usually close to the first performance, this is by no means concrete evidence of a production of the play taking place. Furthermore, the Lord Chamberlain's records of 1669 list Antony and Cleopatra as formerly acted at the Blackfriars, but again, there is no more evidence for this. The Stationers' Register and the Lord Chamberlain's records are the only surviving pieces of evidence that a production of Antony and Cleopatra ever took place pre-Restoration, which has led to much speculation and arguments among critics about the early performance history of the play. After the reopening of the theatres in England in 1660, there was no attempt to revive Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra until 1759. The attempt was made by David Garrick, a hugely influential actor-manager of the 18th century. Garrick's production took place at Drury Lane, and for the production, Garrick used an edited text by Shakespearean scholar Edward Capel. Garrick cast himself in the role of Antony opposite the first actress to play Shakespeare's Cleopatra, Mrs. Mary Ann Yates. Unfortunately, the production was not popular, which is evidenced by its closure after only 6 performances. A significant contributing factor towards the failure of Garrick's performance was undoubtedly the impact of John Dryden's 1677 play, All for Love. Dryden's play was an adaptation of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra and was immensely popular, as Richard Madeline notes that it had 14 London productions between 1677 and 1818, with the busiest decade being the 1720s, where there were 33 performances. One of the reasons that Dryden's text kept Shakespeare's off the stage for so long is due to how difficult Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra is to stage. For playwrights and directors of this time, including Garrick, spectacular and elaborate sets and scenery were in fashion. Therefore, the quick succession of scenes which make up Act 4 posed a huge problem without heavy cutting. However, Dryden tackles this by choosing to set All for Love in Alexandria, never venturing to Rome. For an 18th century audience, popularity for Dryden's production in comparison to Shakespeare's is also due to Dryden's depiction of Cleopatra. Dryden depicts Cleopatra in a sympathetic light, eradicating any sexualization of the character. Evidence for this deliberate depiction of Cleopatra can be found in the preface to All for Love, as Dryden promises the excellency of moral, going on to write, for the chief persons represented were famous patterns of unlawful love. In the play, Dryden censors, adapts, and manipulates Shakespeare's portrayal of Antony and Cleopatra's relationship, into a manner more acceptable for his contemporary audiences. Therefore, Dryden's depiction of Cleopatra as sympathetic, blameless, loyal, and noble in all for love is important when studying the changing depictions of Shakespeare's Cleopatra. To be able to properly analyse Garrick's depiction of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, it is vital to understand what prominent portrayals of Cleopatra came before, to see what Garrick's depiction was conforming to or reacting against. The most prominent evidence of the impact of Dryden's Cleopatra upon Garrick's depiction of Shakespeare's Cleopatra can be seen in Garrick's abridged text, which was published by J&R Tonson in 1758, the year before the performance at Drury Lane. In the text, Enobarbus's famous Barge Speech, which originally appears in Act 2, Scene 2 of Shakespeare's play, which you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen, for Garrick's production is moved into Act 1, Scene 1, just after Antony and Cleopatra have exited the scene. The Garrick text gives the Barge Speech to Thyras, who was a follower of Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra's enemy. This edit is made even more significant by how Garrick also gives Thyras Philo's opening speech in Act 1, Scene 1, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. In doing this, Garrick constructs the scene so that Thyras refers to Cleopatra firstly as the tawny front, as a gypsy, and as a strumpet, all before going on to describe Cleopatra to be more beautiful than the portraits of Venus, or picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature, whilst giving Cleopatra one of the most beautiful of descriptions. The grandeur of the Barge Speech works to diminish the vicious words of Thyras earlier in the play. According to Bedecord and Bergman, one of Garrick's intentions was to establish at the outset Cleopatra as a gloriously wonderful woman. Garrick's intentions, therefore, can be seen in this edit, as the relocation of the Barge Speech manipulates the initial impression of Shakespeare's Cleopatra as more sympathetic than if the speech had been left until later in the play. This decision could be read as conforming to Dryden's sympathetic portrayal of Cleopatra, which was still popular on the 18th century stage. Moreover, the published text shows us that the following lines, also from Act 2, Scene 2, were also moved into the opening scene, just a few lines after the Barge Speech. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. Other women cloy the appetites they feed, but she makes hungry where most she satisfies. Again, by moving these lines into the opening scene, works to emphasize the greatness of Cleopatra, working to further diminish Thyras's earlier insults. However, in Garrick's published text, the speech stops here, meaning that Shakespeare's final lines of the speech are cut. For vilest things become themselves in her, that the holy priests bless her when she is riggish. These lines refer specifically to Cleopatra's sexuality, with riggish meaning unmaidenly or wanton. Cutting these lines deliberately works to further manipulate the depiction of Cleopatra given to the audience of Garrick's production, as again, it reduces the sexualization of Cleopatra. This could be another sign of Garrick conforming to Dryden's Cleopatra, as Dryden depicts a Cleopatra who is virtuous. According to the 1759 prompt book of Garrick's production, which is held by Folger Library in Washington, there is another significant edit in Act 2, Scene 2, as it shows the following lines also to be cut. I saw her once, hop 40 paces through the public street, and having lost her breath, she spoke and panted, that she did make defect perfection, and breathless power breathe forth. Shakespeare uses these lines to present Cleopatra as playful, but also as theatrical, unpredictable, and deceptive, as she performs for her spectators. In the 18th century, actresses were associated with prostitution. Evidence for this is best encapsulated by Sir Joshua Reynolds' Kitty Fisher as Cleopatra, which is dated as 1759 the same year as the Garrick production. The portrait is regarded as one of Reynolds' courtesan portraits, which were portraits of women, actresses, mistresses, models, prostitutes, who in a variety of ways traded sex for money. The portrait is not presenting Shakespeare's Cleopatra, which is evident due to Reynolds' Cleopatra being shown holding the pearl over the chalice. This image is in reference to an historical event which does not appear in Shakespeare's play. Despite this, the date and muse of the portrait are important. For his portrait, Reynolds chooses courtesan actress Kitty Fisher to pose as Cleopatra. The portrait was immensely successful and worked to secure Fisher's position as an actress and courtesan in society. The success of the portrait further conflates the association between Cleopatra, prostitute, and actress in 1759. Returning to Garrick's text, the lines cut from Act 2, Scene 2, which portray Shakespeare's Cleopatra to be a performer, may deliberately have been omitted to diminish the link between actress and sexualization. Furthermore, in Dryden's text, there is no evidence of Cleopatra performing or taking on a role. Dryden writes in soliloquies for his queen, which do not appear in Shakespeare's text, so that Dryden's audiences are always informed of her thoughts, motives, and intentions. Dryden uses these private moments to continually present Cleopatra as loyal to Antony. Therefore, Garrick's decision to cut these lines could be further evidence of the influence of Dryden's Cleopatra. Garrick's failure is extremely important within the performance history of Antony and Cleopatra, as it points to how, even despite Garrick's and Capel's edits, Shakespeare's text was not considered appropriate, fashionable, or acceptable by 18th century audiences. It is also a fantastic starting point to be able to trace how attitudes towards Shakespeare's Cleopatra have drastically changed. After the failure of Garrick's production, there wasn't another attempt to revive Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra until 1813, 54 years later. In this time, Antony and Cleopatra saw a lot of editing. Most notably was Henrietta Boulder's 1807 The Family Shakespeare. In the preface to the text, Boulder writes, "While few authors are so instructive as Shakespeare, his plays contain much that is vulgar and much that is indelicate. I have endeavoured to remove everything that could give offence to the religious and virtuous mind." Despite there being 4 volumes, Antony and Cleopatra, along with Measure for Measure and Troilus and Cressida, are completely omitted from their entirety. In the 19th century, there were 2 attempts to revive Shakespeare's play using heavily adapted versions. These were by John Philip Kemble in 1813 at Covent Garden and William Charles Macready, 1833 at Drury Lane. Both productions have been termed as hybrid productions, as they both incorporated extracts from both Shakespeare's and Dryden's texts. Kemble's production at Covent Garden cast Charles Young and Harriet Fawcett in the roles of the protagonists, although this was not Kemble's original casting decision. In 1788, Kemble had played Antony opposite his famous stage star sister, Sarah Siddons, in a production of Dryden's All for Love. The production had been highly acclaimed, and Kemble wanted to repeat this success by recasting himself and his sister in his 1813 production of Shakespeare's play. However, Siddons famously turned down the part of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, commenting that she would not have been able to respect herself had she played the part how it ought to be played. This is when Kemble invited Harriet Fawcett to take the role. Of Fawcett's performance, a critic for the Examiner found her pretty and genteel, but had a monotonous voice and uniform manner, meaning she lacked majesty and variety. William Macready's Drury Lane production featured Macready and Louise Ann Phillips in the main roles. Phillips' Cleopatra was slated by a reviewer for Atlas, writing that she was flurried and nervous, and consequently boisterous and oppressive. The unbridled passion turned mere termagant on her hands. She carried passion to an extremity that rendered it ludicrous, and tossed and flaunted until Egypt's queen, the haughty, the loving, the beautiful, was quite sunk in an actress who had literally got out of her depth. Unsurprisingly, neither Kemble's nor Macready's production prospered either, both closing very quickly. However, in 1849, Samuel Phelps staged a production of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, which is considered to be the first successful revival of Shakespeare's play. Phelps's Antony and Cleopatra set a new record of 22 performances at Sadler Wells, running to crowded houses long enough to recover expenses. Phelps's production is extremely important within the performance history of Antony and Cleopatra, as it proved that Shakespeare's original text could be viable and successful on the 19th century stage. It also meant that Shakespeare's text was never Drydenized again. Phelps cast himself in the role of Antony, opposite Isabella Glyn in the role of Cleopatra. Glyn is known for becoming the first actress famous for her portrayal of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, and she was so successful that she reprised the role twice more during her career, as well as editing an edition of Shakespeare's text herself, which was often performed as a play reading around the country with her in the role of Cleopatra. Of Glyn's performance, a critic for Illustrated London News wrote, "In this almost impossible of Cleopatra, she put forth new energies and exhibited a versatility of power which surprised those most acquainted with her style and the scope of her genius. She dared at once at that infinite variety. She combined grace and dignity, gorgeous in person, in costume, and in her style of action she moved, according to the situation and sentiment to be rendered. Withal, she is classical, and her poses severely statuesque. Altogether, Miss Glyn's performance is the most superb thing ever witnessed on the modern stage." Not only is Glyn's performance important within the performance history of changing depictions of Cleopatra, but also important for the reputation of the play, as Glyn's performance undoubtedly assisted the establishment or the re-establishment of the play's reputation in the theatre. The next shift I will discuss today is called the Evolving Feminist. This shift explores how Shakespeare's Cleopatra, who is often conflated with Cleopatra VII, has become a feminist icon. When studying my timeline, I noticed that in the 18th and into the early 19th century, the role of Antony was being taken by what we may term as the star actor, with often lesser known actresses taking the role of Cleopatra. However, this begins to change in the 19th century, possibly after the success of Isabella Glyn, as leading actresses of the time start taking the part of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, with lesser known actors in the role of Antony. This points to a shift in the focus of who the play belongs to, putting emphasis onto Cleopatra's role within the play. Following this, in the 20th century, we start to see this change happening in critical literary responses too. Most notably, in 1927, Lucy Simpson argued, "In the last scenes of Antony and Cleopatra, we see that Cleopatra has been transformed by the action, as Hamlet and Othello and Macbeth and the others are transformed. The play, in fact, might have been called Cleopatra as appropriately as Hamlet is called Hamlet or Othello, Othello." Trevor Nunn's 1972 RSC production of Antony and Cleopatra, starring Janet Sisman, is known today for being one of the first feminist portrayals of Shakespeare's Cleopatra in British stage history. Often compared to Peggy Ashcroft, who took the role for the RSC 20 years prior, critics are united in their admiration for Sisman's formidable depiction. Fuller writes of the two productions, "What Ashcroft presented as tenderness, Sisman tended to perform as manipulation. Ashcroft emphasized Cleopatra's nobility. Sisman stressed her independence, which meant that ambiguities were resolved, but in an opposite direction. Here, Fuller is referring to the argument often had between scholars on what Shakespeare's Cleopatra died for, love or politics. In my research so far, I have found that it appears that Ashcroft gave a performance that presented Cleopatra's suicide to be solely due for her love for Antony, to be reunited in death. Yet Sismon's depiction played on the political themes of the play, showing Cleopatra as a leader of a country, eventually giving into suicide to avoid being humiliated by Caesar. Throughout my research, Sismon's name has popped up time and time again, often heralded as one of the best performances of Shakespeare's Cleopatra. Sismon's photograph in role as Cleopatra is one of the most favoured for articles or the front cover of books pertaining to Cleopatra, potentially coming second to Elizabeth Taylor. Admiration for Sismon is encapsulated by Charles Spencer, who, for the Daily Telegraph, wrote, "Back in 1973, I saw my first Antony and Cleopatra, with Janet Sismon starring as the Queen of Old Nile. She knocked me for 6, and her Cleopatra still glows in my memory as one of the greatest Shakespeare performances I have ever witnessed." The prompt book for the production is held at the Birthplace Trust in Stratford-Upon-Avon, and because of a huge waiting list caused by COVID, I'm still waiting to study it. Therefore, for now, it is currently unclear to me whether none intentionally directed or cut the script in such a way to emphasise the political themes of the play, and therefore giving what could be argued as a feminist depiction of Cleopatra, or whether this impression was taken by the audience who watched the play against the backdrop of the emerging 1970s women's liberation movement. Despite not being able to yet study the prompt book and therefore not being able to concretely tell you about Nunn's decisions, I can certainly tell you of Sismon's impressions of Shakespeare's Cleopatra. In 2012, Sismon wrote of Cleopatra, "The critics who read her slithery incidents as shallow or womanish need to rethink. Our concern must be to get rid of the popular jargon around Cleopatra and restore some depth to her heart and animal intelligence to her brain. Yes, of course, it still has to be a great love affair for heaven's sakes, but with knobs on." Furthermore, I was lucky enough to briefly meet Janet Sismon at a play reading of Antony and Cleopatra in March this year. I managed to ask Sismon if she believed that her 1972 depiction of Cleopatra was intentionally feminist, to which she replied that it certainly was, following up with the exact words, "She was a politician, not a whore." Sismon's depiction of Cleopatra was undoubtedly influential upon subsequent depictions of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, specifically including Glenda Jackson's 1987 performance in Peter Brook's production at the RSC, among many more. The third pivotal shift in the changing depictions of Shakespeare's Cleopatra that I will talk of today is the association between Cleopatra and celebrity status. In this section, I will explore productions that have depicted Cleopatra as a celebrity and how this comparison further works to transform Cleopatra for an audience. In 1973, Tony Richardson staged the first modern dress production of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Starring Vanessa Redgrave and Julian Glover, Richardson's production was held at Bankside Globe Festival, curated by Sam Wanamaker. Writing specifically of Shakespeare's characters, Richardson writes, "Antony and Cleopatra are monsters, mean, shabby, drunken, cowardly, indulgent of their own pleasures and vanities, to the point that they're willing to sacrifice their pasts, their honours, and their countries, and yet made glorious by their passion and greed for each other and the style in which they can express them. You can think of many, many parallels today. They are, if you like, the first great stars of history. Cleopatra was like a Hollywood star." John Barber, a critic of the performance, describes Redgrave's costumes, writing, "A decadent imperialist in a red wig, orange sunglasses, and a white pantsuit, reeled drunkenly on 3-inch heels, threw Coke bottles at flunkies, and shouted raucously at her drably dressed maids." And lastly, Francesca Royster commented, director Tony Richardson conceived of Cleopatra as a spoiled movie star who thought the whole world was her oyster. Although the production was panned by a majority of the critics, Richardson's production is important within the stage history of Antony and Cleopatra, as it is the first to challenge traditional perceptions of her appearance. Up until this point, Cleopatra had been depicted as either in traditional Elizabethan dress or in something that was thought to resemble traditional Roman or Egyptian dress. Furthermore, Richardson was the first to deliberately establish this relationship between Cleopatra and the celebrity. Although there are allusions to Cleopatra and the celebrity, or an early modern perception of celebrity, which can be drawn out of Shakespeare's original text, such as the couple never being alone on stage together, always on view to their audiences. For me, Richardson's decision to reframe Cleopatra as a spoiled celebrity is a nod to the filmic Cleopatras, namely Elizabeth Taylor. Joseph L. Mankiewicz's film was a film of financial firsts. In 1963, it was the most expensive film ever to be made, with critics such as Lucy Hughes Hallett, 1990, Sarah Hatchell, 2009, and Simon Ryle, 2014, arguing that taking inflation into consideration, it still is. The film paid its lead star, Elizabeth Taylor, the highest sum ever paid to an actor for a single role. The huge media attention surrounding the film, due to the extravagant budgets and the scandal between Taylor and Burton, elevated Taylor's celebrity status even further. In order to boost and support the financial implications of the film, the studio used Taylor's celebrity status to continue sales and generate further revenue. They did this through the fusion of Taylor and Cleopatra, linking the character of Cleopatra to the celebrity status of Elizabeth Taylor. Whilst it is commonplace to use celebrities to promote films and increase audiences, the conflation of character and celebrity in Taylor's case has had a profound and enduring influence on popular culture and interpretations of the role across a variety of media. This also had a profound effect on Shakespeare's Cleopatra, as from 1963 onwards, for some directors, including Richardson, Shakespeare's Cleopatra is no longer so widely associated with regal status, but with a glamorous, diva-like Hollywood star celebrity status, such as the one attributed to Taylor. In Richardson's production, Redgrave does not look like Taylor, but she has the essence of Taylor through the glamour which is associated with the celebrity. Richardson's production sets a precedent for other productions that follow, which use the same ideology but build upon it. The most recent production that embraced Cleopatra as a Hollywood or modern celebrity was Simon Godwin's 2018 production of Antony and Cleopatra for the National Theatre. For the production, Godwin cast Sophie Okonedo in the role of the Egyptian queen, alongside Ralph Fiennes' Antony. Okonedo was the first actor of colour to portray Cleopatra at the National. For the production, costume designer Evie Gurney drew inspiration from a myriad of stimuli, including 1930s Hollywood glamour, the Italian military, and singer Beyoncé Knowles. In an iconic moment, Okonedo's Cleopatra is seen wearing a yellow ruffled dress, which Gurney states was inspired by a dress worn by Beyoncé in her music video for Hold Up. The song was taken from the hugely anticipated 2016 visual album Lemonade, which was streamed 115 times in the first 6 days alone. The dress was therefore termed the Lemonade dress by her fans. The Lemonade album was hugely influential as it featured the topical theme of Black feminism. In an article for Billboard magazine, Miriam Bale stated that the visual album was a revolutionary work of Black feminism, and stated that it was a movie made by a Black woman, starring Black women and for Black women. In 2016, Beyoncé ranked among Forbes' list of the 60 richest self-made women in America, and was just one of 4 Black women. Moreover, in 2019, when Godwin's production of Antony and Cleopatra was running in London, Beyoncé was listed as number 20 in the Forbes Celebrity 100 list. In choosing to costume Okonedo's Cleopatra in a dress that is so recognisable as belonging to celebrity icon Beyoncé, which simultaneously makes a statement about Black feminism, the production draws a parallel between the 2 women and depicts the Egyptian queen as a Hollywood modern celebrity and feminist icon. However unseen before, the production depicts Cleopatra as the Black Hollywood celebrity. This presents not only a shift in perceptions towards Cleopatra as an icon and new understandings of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, but also marks leaps in racial inclusivity in 2018. Furthermore, the production chooses to costume Okonedo's Cleopatra in the lemonade dress for Act 2, Scene 5. In this scene of Shakespeare's text, Cleopatra is presented with a messenger who brings her the unfortunate news that Antony has married Octavia in Rome, to which Cleopatra replies, "The most infectious pestilence upon thee," followed by the stage direction, she strikes him down. Cleopatra's lines follow as, "Hence, horrible villain, or I'll spurn thine eyes like bulls before me. I'll unhair thy head. Thou shalt be whipped with wire and stewed in brine, smarting in lingering pickle." In Godwin's production, Okonedo was directed to grab the messenger and attempt to drown him in a shallow pool of water. Comparing this scene to the lyrics of Hold Up, in which Beyoncé wears the lemonade dress in the accompanying video, Beyoncé sings, "What a wicked way to treat the girl that loves you," followed by, "How did it come to this? Scrolling through your call list. I don't want to lose my pride, but I'm a F me up a bitch." Hold Up was written and released amid rumours that Beyoncé's husband, rapper Jay-Z, had been involved in an affair. By choosing to costume Okonedo in the lemonade dress for this particular scene, the production draws a poignant parallel between the 2 women's anger, jealousy, and violent nature in the wake of their partner's actions. In a private interview given by Simon Godwin at the Shakespeare Institute on 29th of October 2020, Godwin commented on his use of Stanislavski's magic if in his directing. Godwin stated that he asked Okonedo, "If Cleopatra were alive today, who would she be?" To which Okonedo replied, "Beyoncé." In Godwin's retelling, Okonedo stated that this was because Beyoncé is a hugely powerful woman, that she is incredibly charismatic and beautiful, as well as having worldwide status, being an influencer, and a sort of royalty. It could be argued that in Godwin's production, Beyoncé's image haunts Okonedo's performance of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, replacing the image of Taylor. However, I would argue that this production was enabled to draw parallels between Shakespeare's Cleopatra and Beyoncé due to the association between Cleopatra and the modern celebrity, created by Taylor and built upon by Richardson, and then furthered by Godwin. In 1963, Taylor's impact over the Cleopatra icon skewed perceptions of Shakespeare's Cleopatra, of which we are still seeing. Godwin evokes the image of Taylor by tapping into the legacy of Cleopatra as the modern celebrity, but updates Taylor's image to a more relatable celebrity indicative of the 21st century for a 21st century audience. As I hope I have shown today, Shakespeare's Cleopatra has undergone huge transformations on stage in British performance history. For the purpose of today's talk, I have had to leave out so many incredible Cleopatra performances: Judi Dench, Helen Mirren, Mark Rylance, Frances de la Tour, Josette Simon, and Donna Kroll, just to name a few. However, I hope I've started to illuminate how Shakespeare's Cleopatra has gone from being termed as the worst woman in history to being so influential and iconic, she is now being compared with Beyoncé Knowles. Thank you so much for listening to my research, and I will now do my best to answer any questions, should there be any.
Thank you very, very much, Ella May. That's been a wonderful talk and a very interesting journey that you've taken us through in the different portrayals of Cleopatra. So please, I'm sure you all join me in saying thank you very much, Ella. It's been a very interesting talk this evening, and I'm really grateful that you were able to share some of your early research with us this evening. So thank you. I hope you all stay well, stay safe, and as I say, it'd be lovely to see you at a festival event. Thank you. Bye-bye.